Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Curiosity. This is episode 5. In this episode, though, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to have a discussion about a vast array of various topics. And I brought my good friend, Disney Family Man 23, aka George, to talk about all these cool subjects. With George, if you can introduce yourself and let everyone know where they can find you on social media.
Absolutely. Well, first off, thank you for having me on once again. I love our discussions and everything. And so I am George, also known as Disney Family Man 23. That is my YouTube channel. You should definitely check that out. We have a lot of different collabos that are coming out and that are already out. I have a lot of material out already, so definitely check that out. I am also part of the Grand Circle Tour podcast, which you can also listen to on YouTube and StreamYard and Apple iTunes. And then you could also find me on Twitter at Disney George.
Perfect. Well, thanks, George. And it's always a pleasure having you on. So this is a very different kind of video that we're doing. Usually we stick to like really Disney centric, Disney park stuff. This video, we're going to dive into some kind of like some deep subjects here. So it'll be very fun to kind of tackle all this stuff. The first subject I wanted to talk to you about was life on other planets. This has been like an ongoing conversation for decades and decades, but where do you stand when it comes to the possibility or even probability of life on other planets?
Absolutely. Well, first off, let me just say to you all listeners out there that whatever I say, it is not exactly what it is. I'm only giving you my opinion of what I think and with my beliefs and everything. So, you could take it with a grain of salt or you can agree with me. I'd love to hear from you guys. So my thing is that with my belief that I grew up a Catholic Italian. Of course, if you're Catholic, more so you're Italian. If you're Italian, more so you're Catholic. It kind of goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
So with me, I always felt that God had a reason beyond our earth. If it was just a purpose for us being on this world, it would only be this world. We have other galaxies and within the universe and other planets and everything. And it always made me question, even growing up, was what is the purpose of all these other planets, all these other galaxies? They're not just there to sit there and look pretty,
Right.
So it's like, what are they for? So, as I grew older and started watching, Star Wars and Star Trek and different things, where it made me wonder, well, even though that's a little bit far-fetched, I don't think that Darth Vader's out there floating like, with the Death Star, but I feel that there is some sort of other kind of life forms out there. It may not be with the typical alien of what people surmise as like the green Martian with the antennas or or the
big eyes.
Big eyes. Yeah, exactly. Where it could just be simple plant life. It could be something that's as small as an atom. But I do feel that in some form that there is a purpose of why we have other planets and other galaxies. And there's a possibility that there could be other kinds of life forms out there, no matter how big, how small, how significant it may be to us. But I have a feeling that there is a strong possibility of life form.
Yeah, I actually agree. I mean, as far as we know, the universe is infinite, as far as we know. And I kind of like to use the analogy of like a fishbowl. If you take a fishbowl, right, and you have like 3 or 4 fish in that fishbowl, as far as those 3 or 4 fish know, that's the entire world or entire like existence is that little fishbowl, those little plants, those rocks. That's it, because that's really the only place the fish know. They haven't gone outside of that bowl. And I kind of feel like to a sense we're kind of the same in our solar system. We're kind of these fish in the fishbowl. We haven't really gone too far out. We have probes and what have you, but we really haven't explored the vast majority of this universe. So we're looking at it through a very, very, very small scope, a very, very small scale. So yeah, I think like obviously like in our solar system, yeah, we're probably the only intelligent life. But when you factor in the entire universe, this infinite universe, it would be statistically nearly impossible for us to be the only intelligent life. I think that there has to be something else. It would be very, very it would be very unlikely for Earth to be in this in infinite universe for Earth to be the only planet that actually spawned intelligent life. So I think it's definitely probable. The other thing that I find kind of interesting, and I see this a lot when you read articles about like, NASA and everything exploring other planets, they always focus on like the Earth-like planets when it comes to looking for life. Like, oh, well, this planet's too cold or this planet's too hot. Therefore, they can't sustain life. Why not? How do you know? I know these are scientists, and maybe I'm wrong. Comment below if I'm completely off base here. But how do they know that other life forms don't thrive in extreme heat or extreme cold? Just because maybe we can't on Earth doesn't necessarily mean that other life forms on vast, galaxies, light years and light years away don't prefer that environment. You know what I'm saying, George?
Exactly, because of what they're focusing on is what's within our solar system, where their telescopes can, and their radar and their sonar and all that other kind of mechanical stuff that I don't even really know about, that they can reach, But if you go beyond our galaxy, for how many other planets, there could be a planet where it's not too hot or not too cold or not too windy, so to just go by what's in our solar system, then it's like, okay, well, there's nothing in our solar system that can sustain life other than Earth. That's it. Everything else is the same. If you can't explore or identify that research, then you really don't know. You can't say yes and you can't say no.
No.
It very well might be a no, but you can't give that definite answer without really knowing.
Right, right. And here on Earth, we require air, breathable air. But on some other planet out there in the universe, the life might, survive on something else. They might breathe something completely different out that's not air. So I think that, yeah, our model for planet Earth works, in the sense that it obviously, sustains life on Earth. But I don't think it's the only way. I do think there's other possibilities, other ways life can survive in the universe. And it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be an Earth-like planet. It could be something completely different where certain life forms thrive in that environment.
Right. Well, and even if it was too cold or too hot, as you just said, what we see as humans, we're saying, okay, a human can't survive that amount of cold.
Right.
A human can't survive that amount of heat. Well, obviously, if they're human, they'd be living down here.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Now, what's a really interesting thing, because you mentioned that, I think it's a great point. You mentioned early in the video how, the aliens might not look like what we expect them to look like. What if there's a planet out there in the universe somewhere that is like Earth, like millions of years ago? Like, what if there's a planet just full of dinosaurs? I mean, could you imagine that? Like, because obviously, we've had dinosaurs here on Earth. It's a possibility. I mean, there could be a planet out there that is just full of dinosaurs, as we know, like as we know that T-Rexes, pterodactyls, some planet is full of dinosaurs, like Earth, just millions of years ago.
Don't let the Walt Disney Company know that, because if they do, they'd want to market it for sure.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. That'll be the next resort if they can get you over there.
Yeah. That would be really cool though, because it's one of those things, like, where even with a lot of YouTube videos that I watch, and I'm actually kind of big, and for everyone listening, don't hate me on this, but I watch a lot of ASMR videos, and there was actually several of them where that they role play as if you live on Earth in the future, but you get to go on a vacation to a different galaxy. And it's like, it's all made up, it's all role play, but it makes you really think to say, wow, okay, so if you can go on a dwarf planet, where one side is all day and the other side is all night. It's like, wow, that's really cool that you can visit the daylight side of a planet, but then you could transition over and you get all the nightlife of the planet. It's like
That's
that's
awesome.
that's like really like if obviously they're doing it, as a video just to have fun with it. But when you really sit down and you think of it, it's like, wow, of what could actually be out there is more than just what we're so used to on an everyday basis here on Earth.
Oh yeah, I mean the possibilities are literally endless,
How
with
I
what's out
how
there.
how I look at it is, my geek side is coming out of it. That if you watch the end of the movie Men in Black,
Hmm.
where Will Smith is going into the cab and it zooms out with the camera and it shows the Earth and it shows the other planets and it shows our galaxy. Then it goes outside the galaxy and you see the Milky Way and you see everything. And then our whole entire universe is one marble to an alien on another whole planet. Just
Oh
one
yeah.
marble.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly. And it's like it goes back to that fishbowl analogy. Like we think it's like this infinite thing. We could be this little speck in something bigger, We have no clue as to what it is. So
Absolutely.
it's pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting. But I wanted to segue into this next subject. And this next subject is kind of cool. It's about like the future that we picture, right? Like in media, Hollywood, things like that, and what actually happened. So we've seen like a perfect example. I'm sure you've seen Back to the Future Part 2, right?
Yes.
In that 80s version of 2000, I think it's 2015, if I'm not mistaken.
2015. Yeah.
Yeah, in that 2015 80s version of the future, they focus a lot on like the physical world, how the physicality look, like the hoverboards, the flying cars, the cool looking architectures, the buildings, right? But isn't it interesting how, like, just based on that example, how different 2015 and 2020, 2021 and beyond have really panned out? Because if you really look at like our society, our world, physically it hasn't changed that much. I mean, the cars look different, but for the most part, if you go to a neighborhood, a suburb, a city, they look pretty much the same as they did in 1985, right? It doesn't look that much different. In 2021, it's more information based. It's more, the car doesn't necessarily fly. It's more like, intelligent. It
The
can
technicality within the car itself.
Right. It's that internal smart car
Yeah.
thing. It's your phone. It's a phone, but it's more about the information. It's not really, it's interesting how different. Because like when we picture the future, and even in Walt Disney's era, when he was trying to do the future for like Tomorrowland and stuff, it was very focused on the physicalness of how it looked. But
Mhm.
really, it hasn't panned out that way. It's more information based than it is physical, right?
Well, and not to kind of go on to the Disney subject, because I know this is a non-Disney conversation, but we're going to tie it in there anyway.
Yeah, no, you could, yeah, definitely tie it in.
Because that's
Absolutely.
what Walt was all about. All these conversations that we're having right now, it interests Walt to implement it into his theme parks, into his movies. And I thought that was so interesting about it. But like kind of like what you said about with Tomorrowland. And I think that's the issue with the land itself now, because we are at a time and age where technology is taking over. Technology is the future, and we just keep growing and expanding. That the only thing that we get out of Tomorrowland as the land itself is the architecture,
Right.
because everything else is back in the day. That's what they surmised as, oh, this could be the future. This is what's going to be tomorrow. Well, tomorrow's already here, and we're already surpassed what's in Tomorrowland.
Right.
So it's like, and I think that's the issue with the land itself, is because they can keep updating it, but I think the future is moving too quickly, too fast for how much that they can keep up with the land,
Right.
where it'll just keep going and changing and evolving. And that's where the land is kind of sort of like, that's what Tomorrowland reminds me of. It's like how with the Back to the Future Part 2, we always have that in our minds of, okay, futuristic cars, futuristic buildings. And I get that they were trying to, even like when they had the section where Jaws 3D, where
Oh yeah, that was
where
awesome.
the virtual shark came out, and it's like, well, we got something like that. We got like the type of 3D where we wear the 3D glasses and everything. Not exactly, it's much better graphics than that shark, but
Yeah.
but and the one thing that they did get correct was who actually won the World Series that year. So,
Right.
but
Yeah, it's interesting. It's
but
interesting how that pans out. I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, you're fine. And then it's also during the scene where Marty was on the phone with his boss, but it was on a television screen. Well, it's just like what you and I are doing right now. We're Zooming. We're back in the 80s. We didn't have Zoom. We didn't have Skype. We didn't have those things. So it's like back in those times when you're watching, it's like, oh, come on, you're talking to a person over a screen where you could actually see each other. It's like, how's that going to happen? But it actually did. And
Yeah.
I don't think really a lot of people really notice it and say, oh, so Back to the Future was right. We were going to get, it's just a simple transition that it's like when that technology is available, it's like we just use it. We don't think about it, but it's there. But if we get it taken away from us, we completely lose our minds.
Right, right. Well, and it's funny you mentioned, yeah, Back to the Future 2. Remember that whole scene when there was that arcade game, I think it was Gunsmoke. And the kid
Yes.
was like, "Oh, you got to use your hands. That's for babies." Because
Yeah.
and it kind of reminds me of like nowadays, like everything is like with Alexa, right? It's voice activated. Alexa, turn on my house lights. Alexa, turn on my house alarm. Everything is voice activated or what have you. It's kind of cool. It is. Some of this stuff actually did happen to
Yeah.
some degree.
But the one thing that I am waiting for is for Alexa to make you dinner.
Right?
If
Yeah.
that happens, that's when I'd really be very impressed.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So that concludes this segment, and then we're gonna kind of segue into something else a little different here. And this next topic I wanted to discuss with you, George, is the afterlife. What happens when you die? Uh, Now you mentioned you're a Catholic and what have you, so I'm sure that definitely transpires into your opinion on this. But what are your feelings on the afterlife? What happens when we die?
Well, and that is a very interesting topic. And as I said, I do love talking about this stuff, whether you agree with me or don't agree with me, or if I agree with you, or what have you. I love that we can have in-depth conversations about this kind of stuff. And I think with the afterlife itself is a lot of people, wonder where I think really it comes down to until it actually happens to you. Because I do know some people that where they die and they come back, they get revived.
Now
And
you've
I
known
think,
somebody that has died and
yes,
come back, or
yes,
wow,
yes. And
wow,
it's one of those things where, depending on the person, and I'm not trying to make it sound judgmental, but I think it's more of depending on how that person is and how they live their life, is how you eventually see what it is after you die. Now,
wow.
luckily, this person that I know is a very good person. They live their life to the fullest. They're very kind. They respect people. So when they died, it was more of a peace. It was like something like was uplifting to them, where they saw the light, and they heard the singing voices and everything. And with me, as I said, I grew up Catholic, and as I said, I believe in heaven and hell. Automatically, obviously, I want to go to just one place and not the other. but
Right.
in order for you to believe in one, you have to believe in the other, because with that, it kind of ties in together as heaven and hell. Now, as I, for me, with the afterlife, I believe that we all have our judgment day, and as I said, that's my belief. It may be someone else's different opinion, that based on how you are, of how you lived your life, of how that depicts of do you pass through the golden gates, or you get you go someplace else. It's not golden but very hot. but that's where I believe. Now with me, I know a lot of people say, oh, well, there's a limbo, you're in. I personally don't really believe in limbo. And as I said, now I could be wrong, because no one really knows until you actually die. I personally don't believe in limbo, because for me, it makes it feel like the soul is just like trapped in one place rather than it going to its final destination. So, that's my thing. In the afterlife, I feel that when you die, you have your judgment day, your judgment moment, and then, whether or not, how you lived your life as, a good person or a not so good person, that depicts on where you go.
Now there was this gentleman, and I actually did a video on this gentleman in this playlist of curiosity, and I found him very, very interesting. His name is Eben Alexander. Eben Alexander, and he's a neuroscientist or neurosurgeon, and he actually, prior to dying and coming back, he never believed in the afterlife. He was very science and data driven. When you die, you die. Your brain is dead. You're dead. There's nothing, right? So this gentleman, he got like a bacterial meningitis, died, came back, and he actually experienced what he calls like this incredible odyssey when he died. And he explains it in a great detail, and you can find him on YouTube. He's all over the internet. But basically, in a nutshell, he said that he was like transcended reality, like this physical world feels dreamlike almost and fuzzy and foggy compared to the ultra reality of the afterlife. It felt more real than what we're experiencing on Earth. If that's even, I can't even wrap my head around that.
Yeah, and that's the strange thing is people who have experienced it, it's like they can try to explain it to us, but we're not understanding because it's like there's the caliber of transitioning into almost like different dimensions.
Right.
It's like an unparalleled type of feeling that you won't know until you actually experience it yourself.
Yeah, and then he brought up an interesting thing. And again, I echo your sentiments. Like, I'm not trying to speak for anybody else, and I'm not even saying I necessarily believe this. But what Eben Alexander was saying was that there is a heaven and hell, but it's different than what people think. Like, he was explaining, like, you go, and basically when you get your life review, so when you pass away and when you go to the afterlife, you'll get like a life review, and you're basically in this life review, you're kind of experiencing all the interactions you had with people through your entire life. But the caveat is you're experiencing these interactions from the perspective and the feelings and the emotion of the other person. So if you lived a life of treating people nicely and being kind and generous, you're going to feel that, right? In your life review, you're going to understand like how that other person felt when you were kind and generous to them. But on the flip side, you experience kind of like a hell per se, like a hellish experience. If you were doling out hatred and mean, and you're a nasty person to everybody, right? You're going to feel what those people felt when you did that to them. So your life review is really based on what Eben Alexander was saying, really based on your life experience, where if you're a good person, you're going to have a pretty positive life review. You're going to feel pretty good. If you're a bad person, you're going to feel terrible. You're going to feel every time you really hurt that person, you're going to feel it like they felt it. So he was kind of explaining heaven and hell as like this, like almost like you kind of determine it based on your actions. Now, it's not like a permanent thing. It's more like a lesson. But I thought that was kind of an interesting take on the heaven and hell concept.
That is very interesting. I mean, I never really thought of it in that way, but that does sound very interesting. And I guess maybe what he was explaining in that manner could possibly mean of what I was mentioning about Judgment Day. That may be, a Judgment Day could be something completely different than what I surmise, because a lot of people think, oh, Judgment Day, it's God sitting there with his big rule book, like, going through, okay, well, you did this, and then you did this. I don't appreciate that, but you did this. That could be, but what Judgment Day could be is exactly you looking into, your own life, sort of like how they did in the movie Soul, where he was actually looking at snippets of his life and what his achievements were and what all his life was about.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And kind of almost similar to like A Christmas Carol, right? With Ebenezer Scrooge, and kind of taking that third person outside look at like how you're perceived and how you treated people and what, you know what I'm saying? Like that
Mhm.
outside perspective. It's kind of interesting. It really, really is. Now, staying on the topic of kind of like the afterlife and souls and what have you, I kind of wanted, and this is our last segment for this video, but what are your feelings on animals? Like, do animals? Because we all have we've all had pets. I have so many pets in my life over my life that I absolutely love. I mean, they're family, you know. But what are your feelings on pets and animals in general? Do they have a soul? Do they experience an afterlife, or what are your feelings on that whole situation?
With me, it's more of a thing where I believe that they don't have souls per se, because we're humans, we have the souls. Animals, you know that's why I believe like animals don't get judged, because they don't. I'm sorry, can you hold on 1 second? I'm
Sure,
sorry.
no problem, no problem.
Okay, so for me, I believe that animals don't have souls because what my belief is that they're innocent. They were put on this earth for a purpose. A dog, a cat, man's best friend. Animals are for, providing for meat and milk and eggs, and everything. So I feel that they're, in my belief, that God has a certain place for them in the afterlife, that if an animal has a certain connection to a human, that when that human passes, that animal is waiting for them on the other side, but they have their own section, but where you can meet them in the middle. It's sort of like, I don't know if you heard of, it's like a poem thing, like when animal passes, like the Rainbow Bridge.
Yes, I have heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like the animal is waiting for you on that rainbow bridge.
Yeah, yeah, that's very interesting, and I wouldn't disagree with you actually on that kind of that separate experience for animals. Like they're kind of in a separate, like a separate heaven or a separate afterlife, so to speak. But they can kind of visit you in your afterlife to greet you and what have you. Um, I do believe though, like yeah, like with the animals that are more intelligent, dogs, dolphins, monkeys and things like that. I do believe they have a soul. I mean, I do believe that they do have a soul. And there is somewhere for them after they die. I just, yeah, like you said, I feel like it might be some sort of special afterlife catered more towards the animal world. And like the ones you said that have a strong connection to human beings, they can kind of maybe get into the human afterlife to visit, old friends, so to speak. I have a very interesting story to tell you about this subject. About it's about 3.5, almost 4 years now. We had a little Shih Tzu. Her name was Mitzi. We loved her. I mean, she was family to us. Okay, I mean, complete family to us. We loved her to death, and she was very old. She lived to about 20 years old in dog years. So, I'm sorry, not in dog years, in human years.
Human
She's
years.
20,
Yeah.
20 years old in human years. So we had her for a very long time, but she passed away, and it completely crushed my mom. My mom loved Mitzi. We all did, but my mom was especially close to her. So my mom actually got her a plot, at a cemetery, like a pet cemetery. Like she
Mhm.
actually bought, a grave site and everything for Mitzi, right? And the first few weeks after her death, my mom was a mess, and a real mess. And one day after visiting Mitzi's grave, she was driving through the cemetery, right? And she was crying. She could barely even drive. She was crying, 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 really, really upset. She looks out her car window, right? And she sees like a bunch of grave sites on the ground, obviously in a cemetery, right? But for some reason, this particular cluster of grave sites caught her eye. The cluster of grave sites, there were about 6 or 7 of them, and every grave site said the name Mitzi on it.
Really?
There were like just a whole grouping of them, and they all had, each tombstone said the name Mitzi. And my mom told me this. I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, let me show you. And she sent me a picture. I'm like, wow, that's interesting. It's almost like, and I don't know for sure, but it's almost like Mitzi kind of breaking that fourth wall into the real world, saying, hey, don't cry, I'm okay, giving her that signal,
Oh,
that sign.
I
Hey.
believe that. I really do. Because I've had some experiences with that myself, whether it's with a pet or a loved one. I have had experiences, um, kind of going off the subject, but staying on the subject, not with the animal, but when my dad's mom passed away, I used to call her Ma. She was
Yeah.
my grandmother. And when she passed in 1999, that certain occurrences would happen, and like where china would fall off the counter without it even being touched, and certain little things. And my mom told my aunt about it, and she said, oh, come on, you're over exaggerating, it's all in your head, that can't happen. Well, here she was over one of the days, and she said, well, watch what would happen. Well, we had a little clock radio that would sit on our living room table. Now, mind you, this clock radio was not plugged in. You could actually see the wire was out of the outlet. My mom turned it off, boom, clicked right back on.
Wow.
My aunt ran.
I bet.
So it was
Wow.
like just one of those things where, and it only happened during the duration of the mourning process of my grandmother. And
Right.
then that was it. It was done and over. So it was like almost like, as you said, like breaking the barrier of like a loved one telling you that you're fine, I'm okay, we'll all be okay.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's my belief. That's how I take things.
Absolutely, absolutely. I agree with you. I think you see that like with family members. I feel like even sometimes with animals they do that. It's a way to kind of console us here on Earth. They're
Yeah.
fine. That mean
Yeah.
they're pain free. They're good. They just want to basically tell you, don't worry about it. I'm good. Don't cry. Don't spend every day mourning me. Move on and live your life.
Yes,
So.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's crazy. But yeah, I agree with you for the most part. I think that like obviously there's certain like look, a roach or an ant or things like that. I don't think they have souls.
Yeah. I
But
think it's more so to answer to your question. For me, I don't really call it a soul, but maybe it's like a type of that no one really ever discovered of what it's called for an animal, that it's like an animal type soul. So it's not
right,
like actually titled a soul, but I do believe that their body is here, but their personality, their lovingness of their master, it all goes with them.
right. Because it's interesting because like we have two dogs right now, and then we had Mitzi who passed away a few years ago. And it's interesting how like human beings, how they each have their own little personality.
Mm.
It's not just like a very carbon copy, like they all we have a dog, his name is Little Guy, and then we have another little dog named Mickey. And they're completely different from each other. Like they're personality wise. Like Mickey loves toys, and he always has something in his mouth. Little Guy couldn't care less about toys, never even looks at the toys, right?
Mhm.
It's just funny to me how they each have their own little personality, their own little like fingerprint, so to speak, and that's why I kind of feel like there's something there.
Well, and especially with a lot of people of how they like to consider their pets family. They become their kids,
Yeah.
for people who maybe can't have children, or maybe empty nest parents, all their kids are grown up, gone, and they like to care for something. That becomes their baby. That becomes their child. And it's one of those things that we all believe that we see our loved ones in, once we're done here on this earth. So I'm for sure, when you have that connection with your pet, your animal, that you're gonna see them. I mean, I'm quoting the Golden Girls here, from Sophia, but like where they say, okay, up in heaven, there's cows, there's horses, there's sheep. Well, if that is true, I hope heaven has boots.
Yeah, I hope so. That's funny. That's funny. Well, George, thank you, buddy, for coming on. This is a very, very interesting topic, or subjects, so to speak, something that we don't usually dive into. And I thought it was very cool to kind of dive into that with you. So before we close it out, if you can just remind everybody where they can find you on social media.
Absolutely. And right before I do, I just have one more statement. And it's not that I'm trying to make fun of this subject, but it's a laughing joke in my family. And I think this is the appropriate time for me to say it. That I tell my family that whenever it is my time to move on, and as I said, with my beliefs that I will be in heaven, that my belief is each one of us will get our own private mansion in heaven. That's just how my belief is, growing up and everything. So I always said that I made this deal with God a long time ago that I want to have my mansion right next to Walt Disney. And if I don't get that mansion next to Walt Disney, and I always said, well, I hope heaven has one hell of a good realtor.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I want to live on your cul-de-sac, by the way. I want to
Yeah,
live
yeah.
with you and mom.
We'll have that little end cap right there.
That'd be great. That'd be great.
But again, my name is George, also known as Disney Family Man 23. You could find me by that name on YouTube. You could also follow me on Twitter at Disney George. And I'm also part of the Grand Circle Tour podcast, which you can listen to on YouTube, Stitcher, StreamYard, and iTunes.
Awesome. Well, thanks, George, aka Disney Family Man 23. And thank you all for watching this episode 5 of Curiosity. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye-bye.